Hello everyone. Today we're taking a look at a match between Garry Kasparov and Alexei Shirov, two of the most ferocious attacking players in all of chess history. This game was played back in the year 2000 in Frankfurt, Germany, and it was part of a rapid chess tournament called Giants, and it had the name Giants for a very good reason. Let's have a look at the other players that were in this tournament. What an absolute ferocious lineup that we have in this tournament. And this game in particular that we're taking a look at today got a lot of attention from the chess world. Let's unpack this game. Garry has the white pieces and he opens with e4, and Shirov plays e6. So we have a French defense here. d4 from Garry, d5, and knight to c3. We have knight f6 from Shirov and bishop to g5. So we have a few different options here available to black. One of the most common approaches in this position is for black to play bishop to b4, which is called the McCutcheon variation. But in this particular game, Shirov takes the pawn on e4, d takes e4, and Kasparov recaptures with his knight, taking advantage of the pin against the queen. Notice that this knight is not hanging at this stage. And this particular variation is called the burn variation. It doesn't see a lot of play at the top level as it doesn't have the greatest reputation. It can be a bit passive. White's attack flows very naturally, and black has to be quite accurate actually to diffuse white's initiative. So let's see how the game unfolds. We have knight d7 from Shirov, knight f3, and bishop to e7. Notice now that the pin against the queen is blocked, which means the knight on e4 is now hanging because that pin is blocked. That is why in this position here, Kasparov took the knight, knight takes f6 check, and Shirov here recaptures with the bishop. We now have two pieces attacking the bishop on g5. That is why we have now h4, simply defending that bishop now. Black castles, and we have bishop to d3. And this is where we start to see that very natural flowing attack that white has in the Burns variation. He has a lot of opportunities to cluster his pieces around the black king. And bishop to d3 is an important start to that. That bishop is targeting h7, which can be a very tender point in black's camp. And in this position here, Shirov strikes at the center immediately with pawn to c5, challenging white's construction. And we have now queen to e2. And notice now, even though it looks like this pawn is hanging, we can see that there are two black pieces attacking it and only one white piece defending. Actually, this bishop is pinned to the queen. So the bishop taking this pawn would simply drop the black queen. So this pawn here at the moment is tactically guarded. Black takes on d4, and now we have queen to e4, a very early checkmate threat in one. Have a look at this. We have the bishop and the queen eyeing off on h7. That is a checkmate threat that black absolutely has to respond to. We are only 11 moves into the game and we have our first mate in one threat. Black plays g6. He has to block that diagonal. And now we have castles queenside. So we have opposite sides castling, which means we're going to get a very exciting game. And now in this position here, this is where Shirov first deviates from the standard theory in the Burn variation of the French defense. He plays queen to a5, which looks like a very logical move. It has some points to it. Moving the queen to a5 in many different openings is a very standard counter-attacking measure that black has. In this particular variation, he is actually already targeting the a2 pawn, which would be quite devastating if black were able to infiltrate like that. So there are some very valid ideas behind this move, queen to a5 from Shirov. But I just wanted to go back to show you what the theoretical line is. Instead of queen to a5, what most players do in this situation is they press forward with e5, trying to establish some control in the center of the board. And the way that this line goes is we exchange off that dark squared bishop of black's. Black retakes with his queen to keep control of the center of the board, but we now have this move bishop to b5 to undermine black's grip on that center, and we will quickly pile up with our rooks and recoup the pawn. So the way that this line goes is rook d8, rook e1, a6, we remove the knight, bishop takes d7, and now white recoups his pawn, queen takes e5, and after an exchange of queens we have this endgame with knight versus bishop, and black has an isolated pawn here. So that is how the theoretical line goes. Shirov did not want to do that. It's a rapid game, and Shirov is one of the most ferocious attacking players in chess history, so he wants to keep pieces on the board. He doesn't want to go into this drawn-out endgame where he has an isolated pawn. He tries his luck with queen to a5, attacking the a2 point. Kasparov takes this opportunity now to remove the dark squared bishop, which is an important defender of the black king, especially with pawns on light squares. Black retakes, attacking the white queen, and Kasparov recollects that pawn on d4 with queen takes d4. Notice now that the white queen is attacking that loose knight on f6, which is undefended, which means that black doesn't have time yet to collect the pawn on e2 because he needs to do something about this loose knight. So he plays knight to h5, which is a very understandable and human response to the situation. He definitely did not want to defend with his king and walk into a very nasty pin, which would just walk into g4 and g5, and that would be a horrific situation. But I wanted to show you actually what the computer wanted to do in this position because I find it quite fascinating. In this position here, actually, the computer wanted to play e5, completely positional pawn sacrifice. And the computer's idea is that after white retakes, regardless of how he does it, he's getting bishop to e6 out, and he has sacrificed the pawn, but all of his pieces are getting very active. Have a look at this. White would have to do something about this threat on a2, so he'd play a3, and black's pieces just come to life. Rook to d8, and after queen to e3, the other rook comes to e8, and black has a lot of activity for that sacrificed pawn. So that is how the computer wanted to play that variation. But instead of this e5 move, we have knight to h5. So back here, instead of the computer's preferred e5 pawn sacrifice, we have knight to h5 from Shirov. And now white does need to take time out to guard the a2 pawn, so he plays a3. And now we have rook to d8 from Shirov, attacking the white queen. So white needs to do something about his queen's placement. And he moves the queen to e3. A very nice attacking square here, because remember before how black gave away his dark squared bishop and he has these dark squared holes around his king. While keeping the queen on dark squares means that now she has an avenue to potentially infiltrate into the position. So e3 is a very nice square for the queen at this stage, keeping herself on the dark squares. We have bishop to d7. Shirov is looking to develop and get his other rook into the game as well to line it up against the king. But it's a little bit slow. Kasparov's attack is way too fast. He plays g4, hitting the knight. The knight must retreat back to f6. And now Kasparov creeps forward with his queen, queen to f4, once again hitting that loose knight. It is becoming a very common theme in this game. Actually, this knight is just continuously getting harassed. Black needs to do something about that. He relocates his knight to the center of the board, knight to d5, and it looks like a very pretty piece there. Have a look at this glorious knight in the center of the board, protected by a pawn as well. At moment's notice, can potentially start getting active against the white king as well. So it's a great looking move optically, but it does have a drawback that I wanted to point out to you. If we look at this quadrant of the board here, where the black king is, we can see that there are no pieces defending that king. He only has his pawn shield in front of him, and that pawn shield looks like Swiss cheese. Have a look at these holes. Whenever you see a king that's all on its lonesome like that, it needs to trigger an alarm bell into you that we might start to see fire on the board. And in this position here, Kasparov plays queen to h6, getting his queen very close and dangerous to that black king. And now Shirov realizes, hey, hang on a second, my king, the most important piece in the game, is all on its own. I need to do something about that. And yes, while that knight looks very pretty on d5, it is way more important to bring it back for defensive duties. He slots back, knight f6. The reason for that is because if we just go back to this position here, white had a very, very dangerous and simple threat in this position. Can you see what it is? Have a look at this rook here and have a look at the queen. They are lined up against h7. If only we can magically remove this pawn on h4, black would be completely toast. So there's a very simple plan of just pushing forward with h5 and opening up that file. So what knight f6 does is it brings the knight into the defense of the h-file, h5 in particular, but also by moving the knight to f6, he has also opened up his queen for lateral defense along the 5th rank. So that h5 point is now guarded by the queen, the knight, and the pawn. So a very important defensive move, knight f6. And in this position here, Kasparov plays a really creative and powerful attacking move. He plays knight to g5, which is actually deeper than a lot of people might realize. On the surface of it, it might look simple. We are simply advancing our knight, getting it closer to the black king. What can be more natural than knight to g5? Well, yes, that is true. We are bringing the knight closer to the black king. But there's also a deeper idea behind this move. Remember how I just spoke about white would really love to play h5 and open up that h file and just murder black down that open file. Well, the issue was that black had this lateral defense with the queen to guard that point. Well, with the knight on g5, that queen is no longer guarding h5. So white now once again has reinstated the threat of just pushing his pawn forward to h5. If black were to just waste a move, for example, rook to c8, already in this position here, white can just push forward with h5. And after we give the computer a few seconds to have a think about this position, it's giving this as completely winning for white. There is just no stopping that h-file from being opened up and white just crashing through there. So knight g5, an incredibly powerful move here. Is there anything that Shirov can do to stop this avalanche? He plays bishop to c6. He is counter-attacking the white rook. Shirov sees that part of the strength in white's attack is the rook on h1 and that doubled up configuration with the queen and the rook on the h-file. So he thinks, well, if I remove that rook, well, that should be a good defensive approach, right? Well, have a look at what comes next. He plays bishop takes g6. Double exclamation mark. Unbelievable. Obviously with huge threats now of crashing in to f7. So Shirov has no choice but to recapture the bishop. He takes it with the h-pawn. So what was Kasparov's plan here? Black's construction seems quite stable. Did he just give away a bishop for nothing? Well, when you say A, you have to say B. Kasparov now. Knight takes e6. Double exclamation mark. Just completely shattering the pawn shield in front of black's king. Unbelievable stuff here. A second piece sacrifice in 2 moves. And not only is it a piece sacrifice, this move now is threatening checkmate in 1. Notice that the knight here on e6 is guarding g7. So in this position, white is threatening checkmate. Black has to take the knight. He plays f takes e6. He's got no other option. And now Kasparov starts collecting everything in front of the black king. Queen takes g6 check. The king goes to the corner. King to h8. He picks up the knight. Queen takes f6 check. The king shuffles up to h7. And now we have rook to e1. Kasparov's idea now is that once these rooks on the d file are traded off, he can potentially lift his rook, which would be also conveniently attacking the black queen, and he'd be swinging that rook across to the h-file and delivering a quick checkmate. Shirov tries exchanging the rooks, which deflects that rook from e1 to the d-file, which means that lifting it is a bit more tricky now. So that gives black a moment to try to get his defenses in order. Shirov tries queen to c5. His idea is to try to get the queen back into some sort of defensive posture by retreating back to f8. But in this position here, Kasparov reminds the chess world that it's not just pieces that are important attacking units, but pawns as well. Kasparov plays g5, and now we can see that the combination of the queen and these pawns just marching forward is creating a really horrific situation for this black king here. Shirov tries playing rook to f8, attacking the queen, but we simply have queen to h6 check, forcing the king to g8. Kasparov collects on e6 with check. The king steps forward to d6. And in this position here, we actually have an incredible knockout blow for white actually. It's not the most obvious to see, and both players actually missed it, but Gary spots it later on. So I won't spoil what that tactic is because we'll see it in a few moments. Kasparov first plays this queen h6 check. The king slots back to g8, and it looks like we might be getting a perpetual check here. Queen g6, king h8, queen h6 check, king g8, and queen e6. So we've returned back to the starting position. Are we about to get a perpetual check? Well, Shirov doesn't see the danger in the previous move that he played in the same position. So he goes back to g7, but now Kasparov sees the knockout blow. He plays rook to d6. And now in this position here, what is white's threat? Let's just waste a move for black here. Let's play something like a6 just to demonstrate the ferocious attack that white has here. He plays queen to g6 check, and on king h8, we actually drop the queen back to h5. It's important to keep the queen on the light squares because the king will be trying to escape via the light squares, and it will be important to have the queen lined up there. So queen h5, now king g7, rook g6 check, and the only square that the king has to go is f7, and we can all see how this is going to end up. We simply take on c6 with check, and we'll be collecting the queen as well, and that is a completely winning position. So we can see that after rook to d6, there is an absolutely ferocious attack and devastating threat that's coming with queen to g6. That is why in this position, Shirov plays bishop to e8. He's trying to guard that square for dear life. But now we have a really awesome tactical move from Kasparov here. He plays queen to e7 check. And can you see the point of this move? In this position, actually, Shirov saw the point and he resigned in this position. Can you see what happens if, for example, I don't know, bishop to f7? Well, the issue is, and the tactical point that Kasparov had with queen to e7 check, is that there is now an X-ray between the queens. And now there is the simple rook to g6 check. And after black takes the rook, we pick up the queen, and this is a completely winning position. So that is why in this position, after queen to e7, Shirov resigned. So what an absolutely fascinating game between these two attacking giants of chess. And thank you everyone for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, do like and subscribe. Thank you.